my friend, and welcome to the study. This is another informal, unedited video coming straight to you from our warm, safe, comfortable study, surrounded by books. Some nice people, a sleeping dog, while outside there's quite a raging storm, very high winds, heavy rain. And today I thought we could have a look at a little bit from the life of the Roman Emperor Tiberius, written by Suetonius in this nice little Harvard Loeb Classical Library edition. Suetonius' full name was Caius Suetonius Tranquillius, which I think is a nice idea because it reminds me of tranquility. He was a very famous historian. He lived from about 69 to 122. So at the very beginning of Rome's imperial age, or the beginning of the Roman Empire, most famous for the lives of the 12 Caesars. And here we have an introduction about J.C. Rolfe's Loeb Classical Library. These Loeb translations of definitive Greek and Latin texts with translations, or rather the main corpus of text with their definitive translations, have been in print for a very long time and are always one of the best references for approaching any of these texts in translation, but also as an edition of these texts. Here we have a little bit about Suetonius. Makes several appearances in the letters of the younger Pliny. I think we've done some of Pliny's letters in this study. There's a little bit about Suetonius' scholarship. And about the Emperor Trajan. And his own illustrious life, as he's writing himself about the lives of illustrious men. De viris illustribus. The title conventionally given to a set of biographies written by Suetonius, whose subjects were men who had achieved distinction in literature and literary culture in Rome. There's some really interesting references here. Outside you can hear an airplane. So I'm not able to edit that out very well because my machine's still in the shop. I'd like us to imagine that all of our thoughts and worries and stresses that are disturbing us are going off onto that airplane. Put them on it as it comes near, and then let them go. Fly away through the sky with it. We don't have to think about it. It's going to fly away. And we're going to stay right here without any of those stresses and worries. So we have a nice clear mind and a nice relaxed spirit. Only a portion of the work of Suetonius has survived. In all probability, the collection originally contained 100 or more lives. Rather brief biographies organized in the 5 categories of poets, historians, philosophers, orators, and rather less obviously, teachers of grammar and rhetoric. This much can be said chiefly on the basis of evidence provided by Jerome, who in the 4th century drew extensively from the lives of the illustrious men when writing his expanded version of Eusebius' Chronicle. He also took Suetonius' work as a model for his own collection of lives of famous Christian authors. Jerome gives the names of 32 poets whose biographies Suetonius wrote, from Ennius to Lucan, 15 orators, from Cicero to Gnaeus, Domitius, Afer, and 6 historians from Sallust to the elder Pliny. The date at which Suetonius composed the lives of illustrious men is unknown, but the most plausible view is that it belongs to the last 10 years or so of Trajan's reign, and as noted earlier, that it preceded the lives of the Caesars. And here we have some more about what we know of his works. The lives of the Caesars, De Vita Caesarum, is a collection of biographies of the emperors of the Julio-Claudian and Flavian dynasties, including the short-lived emperors of 68 to 69, and, unpredictably and provocatively, Julius Caesar, who was not an emperor at all. It is a work that has always been admired and valued, yet raises certain problems. For example, the later lives, those of the emperors of the wretched year of civil war, and the Flavians who followed, are of significantly lower quality than the earlier lives, at least in terms of scale. They're much shorter, even though material can hardly have been lacking for Suetonius to include them, and on the surface less authoritative. So some of the mysteries. We are going to look at Tiberius. Suetonius conveys strong images of his biographical subjects. They by and large agree with other sources, and while he usually takes care to present a range of evidence, he is not an impartial reporter, but one who unhesitatingly communicates his own views. Thus he expresses the opinion that Caesar was rightfully slain. He demonstrates that Tiberius fell to unprecedented depths of cruelty. He brands Caligula a monster. He is unequivocal that Claudius was the tool of the wives of freedom. Freedmen. So lots there about our author, Suetonius. Here we have the deified Julius, deified Augustus, stepfather by adoption was Augustus, or his wife, or rather, his Augustus' wife was Tiberius' mother. It gets rather complicated. Augustus' two grandsons and adopted heirs, Gaius and Lucius, had died, and so Tiberius was designated as Augustus' successor. But before that, or before he was to become emperor, he had been a diplomat, a general, and somewhat of a reformer. Here at the beginning of Tiberius' book, biography, Suetonius writes about this branch of the Claudian family. So we have a lot of genealogical background for Tiberius. We have the Latin on this side, and the English on this side. And again, these Loeb edition translations, though one could easily dispute one thing or another grammatically, they're quite definitive and extremely well done. So they form more or less a yardstick, as it were, by which to measure the basics of classical literature in translation. Here we have ex hac stirpe Tiberius Caesar genus trahit, et quidem utrumque paternum a Tiberio Nerone, maternum ab Appio pulcro, qui ambo appicaci filii fuerunt. Such was the stock from which Tiberius Caesar derived his origin, that too on both sides, on his father's from Tiberius Nero, on his mother's from Appius Pulcher, both of whom were sons of Appius Caecus. He was a member also of the family of the Levi, through the adoption into it of his maternal grandfather. So you can see how complicated these families were. There were lots of remarriages and adoptions happening throughout Roman history, especially with the emperors. That makes it complex about who was descended from whom. Tiberius passed his infancy and his youth amid hardship and tribulation, since he was everywhere the companion of his parents in their flight. At Naples, indeed, he all but betrayed them twice by his crying, as they were secretly on their way to a ship, just as the enemy burst into the town, beaten suddenly, torn from his nurse's breast and again from his mother's arms, by those who tried to relieve the poor women of their burden because of the imminent danger. So much detail in such an account. The principal events of his youth and later life, from the assumption of the gown of manhood to the beginning of his reign, were these. He gave a gladiatorial show in memory of his father, and a second in honor of his grandfather Drusus, at different times and in different places, the former in the forum and the latter in the amphitheatre, inducing some retired gladiators to appear with the rest by the payment of 100,000 conspiracies to each. He also gave stage plays, but without being present in person. All these were on a grand scale, at the expense of his mother and his stepfather. He married Agrippina, daughter of Marcus Agrippa, and granddaughter of Caecilius Atticus, a Roman knight to whom Cicero's letters are addressed. But after he had acknowledged a son from her, Drusus, although she was thoroughly congenial, and was a second time with child, he was forced to divorce her, and to contract a hurried marriage with Julia, daughter of Augustus. We know how many Julias there were as well. So within the imperial line, as it were, as it stood, we have a lot of similar names. It's amazing that we have enough literature to untangle them that survives, as even some of the medieval things, there's lacking evidence to support whom was related to whom. He began his civil career by defense of King Archelaus, the people of Tralla and those of Thessaly, before the judgment seat of Augustus, the charge in each case being different. So there he's serving his term as what we would call an attorney in the courts of Rome, but very high up. His first military service was as a tribune of the soldiers in the campaign against the Cantabrians. Then he led an army to the Orient and restored the throne of Armenia to Tigranes, crowning him on the tribunal. So these are all Roman offices that would be held on the way up to being a senator and an illustrious political career. And that includes being a general, a governor, tribune. He besides recovered the standards which the Parthians had taken from Marcus Crassus. Then for about a year he was governor of Gallia Comata, which was in a state of unrest through the inroads of the barbarians and the dissensions of its chiefs. Next he carried on war with the Rhaeti and Vindelici, then in Pannonia, and finally in Germany. In the first of these wars he subdued the Alpine tribes, in the second the Brecci and Dalmatians, and in the third he brought 40,000 prisoners of war over into Gaul, and assigned them homes near the bank of the Rhine. Because of these exploits, he entered the city both in an ovation and riding in a chariot, having previously, as some think, been honored with the triumphal regalia, a new kind of distinction never before conferred upon anyone. He entered upon the offices of quaestor, praetor, and consul before the usual age, and held them almost without an interval. Then after a time he was made consul again, at the same time receiving the tribunical power of 5 years. So Tiberius has an illustrious career. As we can see, this life of Tiberius is quite long, and it reads almost as a modern-day biography. presenting detail alongside fact, or broader fact rather. At the flood tide of success, though, in the prime of life and health, he suddenly decided to go into retirement and to withdraw as far as possible from the center of the stage, perhaps from disgust at his wife, whom he dared neither accuse nor put away, though he could no longer endure her, or perhaps avoiding the contempt born of familiarity, to keep up his prestige by absence or even add to it, in case his country should ever need him. Some think that, since the children of Augustus were now of age, he voluntarily gave up the position and virtual assumption of the second rank which he had long held, thus following the example of Marcus Agrippa, who withdrew to Mytilene with Marcellus, began his public career, so that he might not seem either to oppose or belittle him by his presence. This was in fact the reason which Tiberius himself gave, but afterwards, at the time, he asked for leave of absence on the ground of weariness of office and desire to rest, and he would not give way either to his mother's urgent entreaties. That's a dog there, snoring in the background. His mother's entreaties, or to the complaint which his stepfather openly made in the Senate, that he was being forsaken. On the contrary, when they made more strenuous efforts to detain him, he refused to take food for 4 days. He's a very obstinate man, and very given to, shall we say, childish behavior. Being at last allowed to depart, he left his wife and son in Rome and went down to Ostia in haste, Ostia being Rome's port city, without saying a single word to any of those who saw him off, and kissing only a very few when he left. So you can see that Tiberius has an edge to his character, perhaps from the tribulations of childhood, fleeing the enemy when he was little, perhaps from the bad experiences domestically, but he seems to have had quite a stellar career otherwise. We'll see what he does when he's emperor. From Ostia, he coasted along the shore of Campania, and learning of an indisposition of Augustus, he stopped for a while. But since gossip was rife that he was lingering on the chance of realizing his highest hopes, although the wind was all but dead ahead, he sailed directly to Rhodes, for he had been attracted by the charm and the healthfulness of that island ever since the time when he put in there on his return from Armenia. We get a little bit more here of the details of his activities, and what he did as tribune. On his return to Rome, after introducing his son Drusus to public life, he at once moved from the Carinae and the house of the Pompeys to the gardens of Maecenas on the Esquiline, where he led a very retired life, merely attending to his personal affairs and exercising no public functions. When Gaius and Lucius, those are his step-brothers, died within 3 years, he was adopted by Augustus, along with their brother Marcus Agrippa, being himself first compelled to adopt his nephew, Germanicus, and from that time on he ceased to act as the head of a family, or to retain in any particular the privileges which he had given up, for he neither made gifts nor freed slaves, and he did not even accept an inheritance or any legacies, except to enter them as an addition to his personal property. That sounds funny to more modern ears, but such was the Roman state. From this time on, nothing was left undone which could add to his prestige, especially after the disowning and banishment of Agrippa made it clear that the hope of the succession lay in him alone. Now we're going to look at a little bit, skip ahead to when he became emperor. And we'll look at a bit of text just because that's one of the things we like to do here in this study. I think we'll skip even farther here. There we are. Now, ludorum ac munerum impensas corripuit mercredibus scaenicorum requisis paribusque gladiatorum ad certum numerum redacetis. Let's have a look at this sentence. There's this nice little pen that I found and really enjoy. It's just really small and compact like the Loeb edition itself. And I just checked, it's got a little bit of ink left in it, so I hope it serves us well for this little exercise. So we'll just do one sentence. Maybe the writing sounds will help you sleep, and then we'll talk a little bit about grammar, which might also help you sleep. You can hear Mr. Dog still. Poor Mr. Dog. He's 13 and a half years old. He's a rough collie. And he sleeps very deeply in his old age. I always think it's one of the most peaceful things to have a sleeping dog nearby. You might recognize some endings already. It's pointing. What's happening in this sentence? Whenever I'm writing in these videos, I have to really pay attention because sometimes I'm talking or looking at something while I'm making sure the film works well, the video's going, and I lose my place. So if I don't skip words or write a twice, which I've done before under other circumstances. I'm just going to have a little sip of some green tea. And we'll get to this. So, autumn, ac, quay, autumn again, lots of autumn. So I had to adjust to this chair, which is also very noisy. It's a bit of a creaky old house with creaky old furniture. That's the beauty of this unedited video. I hope it's still relaxing for you. Now, we have ludorum munerum. So we have two genitives there. So we can say of games, ac, as well as. Munerum. So we could say tribute. Munerum. So this is how much the games cost. And what else do we want to look at? Corripuit. Trying to think of a nice word there to shatter, or here our translator uses a phrasal verb, cutting down, cut back on. Maybe shorten. It's hard to find a better expression than this one, but sometimes we don't want to look too much at this and see what we can come up with here. Shortened, or thesaurus would be nice here, but we could come up with reduced. How about that? So, of the games and tributes, costs. So the costs, we have accusative. He reduced the costs of the games and tributes. And here we have, he reduced the cost of the games and shows. So, by munerum here, our translator said shows, or tributes, so this would be part of what a conquering general or someone who's taking a high office would do to show their munificence, is where we get that word, or their largesse, is to put on some public games, or as Tiberius himself did, gladiatorial games, theater shows, that sorts of things. So Tiberius has reduced the cost of these things. So, corriput. Look at that. I was looking at the wrong verb, thinking our author had written cutting down for corriput. In fact, he did write reduced, so those of you reading the Latin are probably laughing, because here we've got requisis, and this is what he's put the phrasal verb cutting down. So we have reducing, cutting down, cutting back on. Even recede, probably. So I think a phrasal verb there is probably a good expression there, probably the best one we can get in English. So we also, is there mercedibus scaenicorum and requisis and redactis. Okay, most our endings. Here we have again our genitive actors. So we're moving from tributes and shows and games. I'm wondering if I can put, instead of tributes and shows there, I'm always thinking of other words. Perhaps we could put something like an exhibition, munerum, tribute, show, exhibition. We'll go back here to actors, so theater. Tiberius likes to be frugal. I think he's getting very frugal and sparse. So mercredibus, the salaries. So we have our participle there, cutting down salaries of actors. Yeah. And paribusque, so que is our and, pairs, gladiatorum of gladiators. What's he doing with the pairs of gladiators? Ad certum numerum, to a certain number. Yes, redactis again, reducing, cutting back on, cutting down. So we're limiting. And what do we have here? He limited. Right. And again, we'll use our participle. So what did Tiberius do? He reduced the costs of shows and games, as well as, we can say, and cutting down the salaries of actors and limiting pairs of gladiators to a certain number. So these two participles, requisis and redactis, are part of explaining how he reduced the games and exhibitions, tributes and shows. How did he do that? And that's how, in English, our present participles work as well. So we can see that grammar actually helps us be more precise in our expression. We don't have to use quite so many words by saying he did it by doing this, this, this. We can forego the prepositions and just use our present participle after a comma. He reduced it, cutting down salaries and limiting gladiators, blah blah blah. Good. We'll have a read of what else Tiberius did before we drift off to sleep. Complaining bitterly that the prices of Corinthian bronzes had risen to an immense figure, and that 3 mullets had been sold for 30,000 sesterces, Tiberius proposed set to household furniture, and that the prices in the market should be regulated each year at the discretion of the Senate, while the idealists were instructed to put such restrictions on cookshops and eating houses as not to allow even pastry to be exposed for sale. Furthermore, to encourage general frugality by his personal example, he often served at formal dinners meats left over from the day before and partly consumed, or the half of a boar, declaring that it had all the qualities of a whole boar. And you hear there's a dog in the background walking across the floor, and the airplane flying in the sky that we're not going to pay any attention to. Those are our extraneous thoughts and cares and stresses, and we're just going to let them be in the sky flying around and keep our attention here on the pages of the books in the study. What else did Tiberius in his frugality do? He issued an edict forbidding general kissing. That's another sound that we can ignore from outside. Quite funny. As well as the exchange of New Year's gifts after the calends of January. How is that for austerity? Well, we don't observe that here in the study because my gift to you is wishing you a very, very relaxing, peaceful sleep, free of cares and worries, and full of happiness and peace and tranquility. Be good to yourself, my friend.